After decades spent preaching, stirring controversy, and influencing people around the world, John MacArthur has passed away at 86 years old, but what occurred during his final farewell will truly leave you speechless. From the unexpected guests who showed up to the notable absences and the emotional tributes that left an entire church in tears, this funeral was far more than just a ceremony, it was a reckoning. Stick with us, because what took place behind those closed church doors is something the world was never supposed to witness. John MacArthur wasn't merely a pastor, he was a theological titan, a spark for debate and one of the most familiar figures in contemporary evangelicalism. Thanks to his decades leading Grace Community Church, whether it was his bold stances on controversial theology or his unflinching sermons, MacArthur molded a whole generation of believers. But now, with his passing at the age of 86, the world is not just reflecting on his memory, it's questioning the true weight of his legacy. In this video, we're taking you deep inside the surprising and emotional moments from John MacArthur's funeral, the heartfelt tributes that left grown men weeping, the conspicuous absences raising eyebrows, and the cryptic farewell message MacArthur himself left behind, revealed publicly for the very first time. That's right, we're sharing details no major media outlet has touched. You won't believe what was spoken from the pulpit or the chilling silence that followed certain names being spoken aloud. This is far more than just a goodbye, it's a tale of loyalty, legacy, and unresolved tension. So don't go anywhere, because what unfolded at this tribute reveals more than anyone ever imagined. The sun had just begun rising over Sun Valley, California, when crowds started to gather outside Grace Community Church, the very place where John MacArthur had preached for over half a century. But on this morning, the pulpit stood vacant, a powerful symbol of a life that had come to an end. The lines stretched down the block, men and women of every age, background, and denomination quietly stood, waiting their turn to honor the man who had impacted their theology, shaped their worldview, and for some, transformed their lives. The funeral, held just days after the public announcement of MacArthur's death, was a private invitation-only service. Still, that didn't stop. Hundreds from arriving outside, many holding worn copies of his books, framed photos, or handwritten letters filled with gratitude. The church activated its live stream for the global audience, and within minutes, over 250,000 people had tuned in, watching from nations like Brazil, South Korea, South Africa, and the UK. It was a powerful sign of just how far-reaching his ministry truly was. The sanctuary was draped in white lily and deep navy sashes, simple and reserved, exactly the way MacArthur would have preferred. At the front of this stage sat a large portrait of him from his earlier preaching years, Bible in hand, eyes locked in intense focus, the very look that powered decades of his expository preaching. The service began with a hauntingly beautiful rendition of "Great is Thy Faithfulness," performed by the church's choir. It was immediately followed by a moment of silence that lasted precisely 86 seconds, 1 second for every year John MacArthur lived. What followed next weren't speeches from celebrities or famous television preachers, but heartfelt words from his family members, seminary students, and a few of his closest colleagues. Their tributes were unfiltered, personal, and incredibly revealing. His son, Mark MacArthur, took the podium, visibly struggling to keep his emotions in check. "He wasn't just my father," Mark said, voice quivering. "He was my very first pastor, my first truth teller, and the one who taught me that obeying Christ matters more than being liked by men." Close friend and longtime ministry partner Phil Johnson delivered a moving eulogy, describing MacArthur as a tireless defender of the truth, a rare kind of leader who feared no man. But it was Phil's closing line that sent shockwaves across the internet. Yes, he was hated, misunderstood often, but he never once diluted the gospel, even when it came at a price. Several former students of the Master's Seminary also came forward, some now leading churches of their own. One shared how MacArthur would frequently arrive at the seminary's library before dawn, reading for hours before teaching even a single class. Another recounted how MacArthur had quietly paid off tuition for several students, never speaking a word about it to anyone. Yet while the tributes built a portrait of a firm and faithful man, the funeral wasn't without its share of tension and unanswered questions. Several notable figures were conspicuously missing. Big names, Al Mohler, John Piper, even Franklin Graham, were nowhere to be seen, either in person or by video. Their absence triggered a wave of speculation in livestream comment sections. Was it simply a scheduling issue, or was something more complex going on behind the scenes? Then came the moment that stunned the entire church, a pre-recorded video from MacArthur himself, filmed just 6 months before his passing. It opened with a steady, solemn greeting. "If you're watching this, then the Lord has finally called me home." In the message, he thanked his congregation, challenged future pastors to hold fast to the truth without compromise, and most notably issued a stern warning about false teachings. "They are already slipping into the very pulpits where I once stood." His voice was steady, but the message was unmistakably firm. Hold the line, never exchange clarity for the comfort of culture. As the video came to an end, the sanctuary was overcome by silence. No applause followed, no music played. Just stillness. Yet this wasn't where the story ended, because while the public tribute honored MacArthur, the preacher, what occurred behind closed doors revealed a more fragile, complicated legacy. In the following section, we reveal what took place during the private family reception and the emotional aftermath it left behind. Once the solemn ceremony concluded, most attendees quietly made their way out of the sanctuary. But behind the main church building, in a tucked-away fellowship hall usually reserved for leadership meetings, a more private reception was already unfolding. This gathering was intended solely for MacArthur's family, closest ministry allies, and inner circle. What transpired in that intimate space revealed a very different side to the farewell, one marked by quiet tension, long-held disagreements, and deeply emotional exchanges that never appeared on the live stream. According to sources close to the family, the mood inside was respectful, but undeniably strained. Though there were embraces and shared memories, a clear divide was noticeable between some family members and veteran ministry leaders. A few sat in silence at their tables, while others made efforts to avoid eye contact completely, the kind of subtle signs that point to unresolved wounds. More than one attendee observed that none of MacArthur's grandchildren spoke during the main service, and only one granddaughter gave a short statement during the reception. Reportedly, she said, "He was a giant in the pulpit. But sometimes giants forget how to be gentle at home." The room fell into an awkward silence after that. In an unexpected twist, several former staffers from the Master's Seminary, individuals who had left the ministry in previous years, were also present. Some were greeted warmly, others, it seemed, were deliberately kept at a distance. A former seminary dean shared that there had been lingering tension for years. Some felt edged out, others overlooked. And while this day wasn't meant to be about internal politics, those politics eventually surfaced. They became impossible to ignore when a well-known figure from MacArthur's longtime circle, a senior elder who had served beside him for over 30 years, stood to give closing remarks at the reception. But just moments into his speech, one of MacArthur's adult children reportedly interrupted, saying, "Let's not rewrite history today." The tension in the room surged. Although it didn't erupt into open confrontation, multiple insiders later said the divide was impossible to miss. Generational clashes, ideological rifts, and buried resentments were all quietly simmering beneath the surface of what was supposed to be a final moment of unity. One longtime supporter put it this way: "It felt like watching a ministry dynasty quietly crack apart in real time." Some people wanted to focus on legacy, while others seemed more concerned with control. Then came a moment that absolutely no one saw coming. A sealed envelope was placed on a small wooden table near the exit of the reception hall. On the front, it read, "To be opened by my family." It was reportedly a handwritten letter left behind by MacArthur himself, not addressed to his church, not to his followers, but strictly written for his children and grandchildren. While the full contents of the letter haven't been publicly released, a close family friend who read it revealed that it was a deeply personal note filled with both heartfelt encouragement and painful regrets. The letter she shared included apologies for moments when he had been emotionally distant, and urged his family not to let theological disagreements come between them moving forward. "Love each other well," the letter reportedly concluded. "That's all that will matter in the end." Some were moved to tears as they read it. Others, according to witnesses, simply walked away. The reception came to a quiet close, with guests leaving in small groups, no press conferences, no big statements. Just the solemn weight of a legacy handed down, and the looming uncertainty about what would happen next with the institutions he left behind. But this wasn't the only chapter unfolding behind the scenes. Because while the family grieved privately, the public began to ask a much bigger question. What happens now to the empire John MacArthur built? In the next section, we'll uncover the internal unrest already rising within his ministry's leadership and the quiet struggle for control that has only just begun for over 5 decades. Grace Community Church, grace to you, and the Master's Seminary stood as the 3 central pillars of John MacArthur's influence, interconnected ministries that together formed one of the most dominant evangelical forces in the United States. But now, with the founder gone, one critical question hangs in the air. Who takes the reins and the problem? There is no clear answer, unlike many megachurch leaders who eventually name a successor or leave behind a formal transition plan. MacArthur never publicly appointed anyone to succeed him. Even during his final messages, there was no hint that any change in leadership was near. His silence on the matter, whether strategic or stubborn, has now left the ministries in a strange state of limbo. And according to those close to the situation, it's already fueling behind-the-scenes conflict at the center of this brewing leadership battle is Phil Johnson, MacArthur's longtime confidant and the executive director of Grace to You. For years, Johnson was seen as the natural voice of MacArthur's theology. He edited his books, defended him online, and essentially served as a gatekeeper to his public persona. Most believed he would eventually carry the torch, but now, due to recent health concerns and mounting disagreements behind the scenes over how to modernize the ministry, his future in that role is far from guaranteed. That path may have already been thrown off course. According to sources close to Grace to You, Phil Johnson has quietly stepped back from his day-to-day leadership duties in recent months, fueling speculation that younger voices are being positioned to take on more influence. This includes a few faculty members at the Master's Seminary who are reportedly pushing for a sort of rebranding. Their vision? Retain MacArthur's firm biblical foundation, but soften his confrontational tone and expand the ministry's digital reach to connect with the next generation. But that vision isn't going over well with the old guard. Several longtime elders at Grace Community Church, including some who helped shape its doctrinal structure alongside MacArthur himself, are reportedly pushing back against any major changes. One of them was said to have told a staff member, "John's message doesn't need a makeover, it needs a megaphone." These senior leaders fear that loosening the strict lines MacArthur once drew could endanger the very foundation upon which the church was built. Meanwhile, the Master's Seminary, an institution that has trained thousands of pastors across the globe, is becoming ground zero for growing internal debate. Recent board meetings have reportedly grown tense, with clashing views over whether the school should diversify its curriculum, modernize outdated administrative policies, or even permit faculty with slightly differing doctrinal views to teach. Some younger professors are advocating for more open dialogue around topics MacArthur once strictly avoided, issues like mental health and ministry, racial justice, and a reassessment of certain secondary theological doctrines. At the core of it all are 2 massive concerns: money and messaging. Nonprofit financial disclosures show that MacArthur's combined ministries pull in millions annually through donations, book royalties, tuition, and broadcast deals. Now, the control over those financial resources is under review by internal boards, and some fear that disagreements over the direction of the ministries could eventually spill into public legal battles or even lead to full-blown ministry splits. Legal advisors who specialize in church leadership and governance are already weighing in. One advisor, who requested anonymity, stated, "When a legacy figure dies without naming a clear successor, these kinds of power struggles are almost always inevitable, especially when the entire brand has been built around one central voice like MacArthur's." And this is where things grow even more complicated. MacArthur's will reportedly contains clauses outlining how his name and teaching archives can and cannot be used following his death. While the full details haven't been confirmed, early sources suggest he left instructions emphasizing doctrinal purity and cautioning against making cultural compromises. This has left current leadership facing both a moral and legal crossroads: remain anchored in the past or risk evolving and being labeled as betrayers. Already, blogs and online forums are buzzing with speculation. Some are predicting a possible split, with Grace to You breaking away from the seminary. Others suspect that MacArthur's family, especially his son, Mark, might step in to assert stronger control, particularly over brand rights and archival materials. Whatever unfolds next, one thing is becoming undeniable: the ground is trembling beneath the foundation. The man who once stood unshakably for doctrine has left behind more than just a pulpit. He's left behind a kingdom and no clear heir apparent to inherit it. But as these ministries grapple with influence and future direction, a larger, more unsettling question is echoing through the broader evangelical world, one that reaches far beyond organizational leadership. In the next section, we dive into how MacArthur's passing is forcing churches and believers everywhere to face the uncomfortable legacy of spiritual authority, power, and accountability. In the days after John MacArthur's death, tributes poured across social media, news platforms, and church bulletins around the globe. Many praised him as a theological giant, a bold defender of gospel truth, who never flinched in the face of compromise. But others, especially those who were once part of his ministries or who felt the harsh edge of his teachings, offered far more complex reflections. And that tension sparks a deeper, necessary question: what is the true legacy of John MacArthur? For countless followers, his legacy is defined by unwavering dedication to expository preaching. Week after week, for over 50 years, he opened the Bible and walked through it line by line, chapter by chapter. Over the course of 43 years, he preached through the entire New Testament, a level of consistency and discipline few have ever matched. At a time when many churches turned to flashy programs and feel-good sermons, MacArthur held firm. He never shied away from the hard truths. His best-selling works like The Gospel, According to Jesus, and Ashamed of the Gospel confronted the foundations of modern evangelical culture. He openly challenged seeker-sensitive models, condemned the creeping influence of pragmatism, certaintyism, and stayed fiercely loyal to the doctrine of God's sovereignty. To his loyal supporters, he was a kind of modern prophet, a man who refused to bend to cultural winds, no matter how fierce the opposition. But that same rigidity became the very center of controversy. Critics, including former staff, ex-members, and even other pastors, argued that MacArthur's strict black-and-white worldview left little space for grace, little space for genuine questioning, and no room at all for dissent. His teachings on sensitive topics like gender roles, mental health, and spiritual abuse drew serious backlash. He routinely dismissed opposing views as unbiblical, leaving many feeling excluded or spiritually wounded. One former member of Grace Community Church posted shortly after his passing, "He taught me the Bible, but he also taught me to be afraid of my doubts. I'm still recovering from the shame I carried, feeling like I was never strong enough to live up to the standards he preached." And then there are the controversies that overshadowed his later years. The public shaming of abuse victims who refused to reconcile with their abusers, as seen in the now infamous Aileen Gray case. The harsh church discipline of members who dared to question leadership. The open defiance of public health mandates during the height of COVID-19. These weren't just missteps, they became defining moments for many who eventually walked away from his church, disillusioned and deeply wounded. Even his seminary didn't escape criticism. While it successfully trained thousands of pastors and solid theological foundations, it also developed a reputation as a place that rarely allowed doctrinal flexibility. Even on the smallest issues, stories have come out about students being pushed out or blacklisted simply for raising concerns or asking difficult questions that challenged the norm. And yet, despite all of this, the controversy, the division, the mounting criticism, MacArthur's influence only continued to grow. His sermons still rank among the most downloaded in the history of Christian podcasting. His books remain standard texts in seminaries across the globe. And his mark on American evangelicalism is impossible to deny. Now, the real question is, what do we do with that legacy? Do we enshrine him as a hero of the faith, turning a blind eye to the pain he may have left behind? Do we tear down everything he built, erasing decades of earnest ministry because of the scandal and fallout? Or do we hold both realities in tension, honoring the good he accomplished while also facing the serious flaws in how it was sometimes carried out? Many now believe that's the challenge for the next generation of pastors, especially those who were shaped by his teachings. Can they stand for biblical truth while showing compassion? Can they lead with conviction but avoid instilling fear? Can they absorb the strengths of MacArthur's legacy without inheriting the blind spots? Online conversations are already beginning to shift from pure admiration to deep reflection. On Reddit threads, YouTube panels, and church podcasts, young Leaders are beginning to ask hard questions. Are we repeating the same mistakes? Are we turning flawed men into untouchable saints without reckoning with the full weight of their leadership? Even within the Grace Community Church family, there's a rising call for change, more transparency, more accountability, less gatekeeping. All signs point to a new chapter beginning, whether leadership is ready for it or not.